I dream I know deep of my feelings for you. Watch them grow.
And we are officially live.
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Oh, thank you, Spooky Voyager, for the follow. Appreciate it very much. I am Underground Media, and my co-host is Red, and our guest tonight is Larry from Night Dive, and we are going to be talking cancel culture. Welcome back, Larry. Appreciate you having you on.
Welcome back,
Great.
sir.
It's always good to be here.
Absolutely. And we like having you here because we can talk games, we can
Absolutely.
talk history, we can talk culture, we can talk everything. It's great.
So, first of all, Red has already expressed his appreciation. I'm either famous or notorious, depending on how you want to look at it, for having a T-shirt for every occasion. So, I went with make Orwell fiction again for this evening. So our topic is cancel culture, and I had to actually ask for the opportunity to talk about this. There was a particular event that led me to this request, and this is a headline from Slate, dated April 4th, so really pretty recent. The headline reads: Trump decries cancel culture, calls on Republicans to boycott more companies, which is a kind of ironic headline, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You're trying to cancel the cancel culture and saying that canceling the cancel culture is okay. It's just one of those things. So I thought we would have a discussion about cancel culture, and is it real? What's the history behind it, and what does it mean for us today? Before I jump into the topic, I thought that I would actually start with a bit of a confession. So I was born in 1955. Grew up. A lot of my opinions were shaped in the 60s and the 70s. I have told more than my share of racist, homophobic, transphobic, and just generally offensive jokes. And there's a defense that people of my generation often use, and that's it wasn't offensive during the time we told it. And let me just say on that defense, bullshit. We always knew those things were offensive, and I'll tell you how we knew those things were offensive. I have been in the room plenty of times when people told offensive Jewish jokes, either based around stereotypes or that endless subject of humor, the Holocaust. I was the one sitting there with a phony grin plastered on my face.
Sure.
I really believe in the words of Rabbi Hillel, who said, do nothing to your neighbor that you would not want your neighbor to do to you. That is the whole of the law. The rest is commentary. So I really believe that. That said, I fortunately or unfortunately, that was before social media. So the record of those things that I'm truly sorry for exists mostly in my conscience, my guilty conscience on those topics. And I certainly don't repeat those behaviors today. I mean, I know
Sure.
At the end of the day, A, they're not funny, and B, they're harmful. Mm-hmm. So that's just that, and that's just a topic of that I wanted to clear off my chest.
Sure.
So thank you for that. Forgive
Absolutely.
me, Father, for I have sinned. That said, I thought, usually when I do these presentations, I always like to be, really serious about what I'm going to say. I don't try to skirt around it. I don't try to make you guess what my point is.
Right.
So I'll tell you what I hope that you'll get from my thoughts today and from what I'm going to share with you. One is, just because there's a word for something doesn't mean that that thing is real.
Very true.
That's the first point. And the second point that kind of goes along with it is that words have power.
Yes, they
Absolutely.
do.
And the words that we use, dictate how people are going to perceive them. So, hey, Red, would you help me out with this one? Let me establish the first point. Red, have you ever gone hunting?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever gone snipe hunting?
I mean, other than Call of Duty.
No, I'm not talking about snipe.
Oh no,
snipers.
I have not personally gone snipe hunting, but I've sent people on snipe hunting trips.
So snipe hunting is something that's famous. I'm glad that you get that. But snipe hunting is something that is either famous or infamous. Generations of students have been sent out with their forked sticks and their snipe bags to go hunt for snipe at night, and spend all night outside trying to hunt snipe. And the butt of the joke is that there's no such thing as snipe.
Right.
So there you are.
It's like the mysterious jackalope.
Absolutely, but the words exist, right? So there's a snipe hunt, and I'll tell you where I'm headed is cancel culture. Is the term cancel culture really just a snipe hunt? And then the second thing that I'm going to talk about is the power of words and how we get persuaded by the words that somebody uses. So,
Absolutely.
I did some research. I'm a historian. I love that stuff. Well, actually, no, I'm a historian as a hobby. I make video games for a living, but
Right.
But I did some research into the origins of the term cancel culture. So I found an article, that kind of chronologues it. It's an interesting thing. The first use of the term cancel culture that they found on social media. This is only on social media, but was dates back to 2014, and it was in an article. It was from a tweet by a guy named Miles McNutt, who's professionally a TV critic and was, at least at the time, an assistant professor at Old Dominion University. And the thing that's interesting about it is that when Miles was talking about cancel culture, he didn't mean anything political or anything offensive. What he meant by cancel culture was that the TV networks would give a show a really brief trial, right? I mean, if the pilot didn't catch on and maybe one or two episodes, they would cancel the show.
Right.
And that's what he meant by cancel culture, right?
Gotcha.
Okay.
Nothing scary about it. His exact tweet was, "It's unfortunate how renew/cancel culture has made not renewed early read as canceled. Wait and see until pilots come in is normal, right?"
Yeah.
So that was that. But that phrase cancel culture morphed. It changed into meaning something else, and so the meaning of it, changed over time into something more political. And as far as people can find, it really began in 2017. So Aly Raisman, famous gymnast, she was one of the many young girls to accuse Larry Nassar, who was the Olympics gymnast doctor, of sexual abuse. And it's no longer up to debate. I mean, Larry Nassar was convicted for something like 500 counts of sexual abuse.
Ridiculous.
Many of his victims were children. I mean, these were very young girls, and
Right.
and they dressed as one would expect of girls in a gymnastics program, right?
Right.
You don't wear a hijab to gymnastics, or maybe you do, but I mean, it's typically leotards, right? I mean, that's what it is. So then Gabby Douglas, a teammate, wrote, "Well, it is our responsibility as women to dress modestly and be classy." That was not a well-received remark, and people felt, and my tendency is to agree with it, that she was blaming the victim, right?
Right.
That young girl wearing a Pokemon T-shirt. I mean, who could resist that kind of thing? So Shanita Hubbard, also a teammate, responded by saying, "Let's talk cancel culture. Personally, I'm willing to give a lot of grace to young black girls simply because the world doesn't." And so that phrase of cancel culture became linked to the Me Too movement, right? I mean, so you were gonna cancel people where they felt that there were reasonable charges of sexual abuse. So by 2017, people began talking about cancel culture on Twitter in quotes, right? And canceling became synonymous with denying someone, often a celebrity, attention, right? Because of something they had done or said. People began denying support to once popular figures, including Bill Cosby, Michael Jackson, Roseanne Barr, and Louis C.K. Now, let me just go back and say, of course, Michael Jackson has passed, but Bill Cosby was able to dodge the charges until his recent for a number of years. And Louis C.K., who was canceled for a while, he came out and he did his own things and broke all kinds of records. So this talking about cancellation, of canceling these stars, is probably exaggerated.
I think to a point it is.
I've mentioned before, Red, that I'm also, I'm at heart a capitalist, right? And I believe that I can control my own IP. I certainly don't want anyone telling me that I have to put one of the games that I publish on this site because I have it on that site. It's up to me to choose where I display it. And if I disagree with the financial policy, or if I disagree with the political views of a site, I don't have to do it. I control my own IP, right? And that makes sense to you. But then when I talk about the Dr. Seuss books being pulled by the estate of Dr. Seuss, right? Go ahead, Red.
I was going to say where it doesn't make sense to me, is I forget. I just know her by Gina. I cannot pronounce her last name, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time to all of our viewers. She is very open as being a conservative and a Republican, and all of a sudden she gets shoved off of the movie series that she's in. Because
the woman from The Mandalorian, right?
Yes. That's the one. So now I fail to see where that becomes appropriate, because there's several people in all of our worlds that differ in beliefs and opinions, and we're not trying to shove them out of their job, right? So I'm trying. That's where I struggle.
I'll give a rebuttal on that kind of. Right. Okay. You hire people because they draw an audience.
Right.
And again, I mean, her remarks offended, a portion of the population. If somebody who's in charge of business like me does the equation and says, well, on this hand, are the people that are okay with what she said, and on this hand are the people that aren't okay with it, and this hand is higher than that hand.
Right.
Then that's the way she's that's the way she's going to. I will also point out that while she left The Mandalorian, she got another gig someplace else.
Yes, with another entertainment.
The one that I was going to actually bring up, and I want to say it was Teen Vogue, somebody that was a social media person on Teen Vogue, had done a series of certainly homophobic, possibly racist. I don't remember what it was.
Right.
But I do remember explaining to one of my friends that when I hire a social media person, if they offend my audience, that is their job. That's
right.
I hire them not to do that.
Yep.
Let me give you something on the other side to it. Something that was near and dear to my heart, and I can't recall her name, but she was the author. She was the writer for a video game series, and she did a post on Twitter about writing, and somebody that didn't have her credentials, that was not in the business, a person.
Right.
I don't want to denigrate them and say a rando, but it was a rando. I mean, it wasn't It wasn't the editor of a magazine or whatever.
Right.
He challenged
the average person,
and she shot him down by saying, you don't have the credentials. And he said, well, that may be, but I can still be right. And this continued until there were hundreds of people involved in this thread. And she ended up getting fired. And she accused him of mansplaining, saying that, that's something that does happen. But she got fired. And I surprised some of my friends in the gaming community by saying that I understood, and it's not up to me to support it. I mean, they didn't ask for my support or opinion, but I certainly could explain why they fired her. I don't know if I would have done the same thing. It depends on the circumstances, but I can certainly come up with a reason why it might have been, because after like the 50th or 60th tweet, it wasn't her position. It was that she was too stupid to stop.
Right. That's exactly it. And there's one thing I want to mention also real quick is that there is a difference between canceling and accountability.
Yes.
You can have accountability without completely canceling somebody. And like you said, if you hired a social media person to, advertise, to do your marketing, to do your social media, it's their job to have that professional position, to act in a professional manner, and to do that. And if they are not doing that, then they are not doing their job.
It's a matter of competence rather than politics.
Right. Correct.
The other thing that goes with that, Red, and that I do want to say is that again, you get into that capitalism thing. We're assuming, and I'm not playing games. I mean, I'm pretty sure she got fired for her remarks, right? And when those came out,
and I'll be full disclosure, I'm not aware of exactly what was said.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stand very firm on that. Kind of like I think it was during the live panel that we did. A subject was brought up, and I did not know all the details, so I can only go off of some stories that I've seen. So I am kind of going a little blind into that particular case.
And I would say where you start getting into a gray area is at my company. If I have certain standards of conduct, you may not agree with those standards of conduct. Don't come to work for me.
Right.
But if I have those standards of conduct and you violate them, then right to work states, right?
Right.
Yes.
Where right to work doesn't mean this is what you think it means, but no shirt, no shoes, no service, right? I have the option for that.
Yep.
So, and again, but we tend to view those things through a political prism. and to favor both sides of it. Again, and I know I have some friends who are in the gaming industry. I mean, they might take my point of view about, at a certain point, how does that saying go? Never argue with a pig, because it drags you down into the mud and then beats you with experience. I mean, at a certain point when you're in a debate, at a certain point when you're in a debate, you should understand that you're not making headway and say, choose to end it. Right.
Yeah. Which I've actually had to do just over the last couple of days over certain circumstances that are happening in our world. Again,
let's talk about what's harmful or what's not harmful. So I told a joke the earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of on the topic of words, and it's one of my slightly off-color jokes. And by the way, you're going to have to book me in to do a show on Jewish humor. I'll have to talk about that, and I'll go to the origins of the word off-color. But so here's the joke that I told. Organic is a marketing term, right?
Mm-hmm.
You pay extra for organic fruits, organic vegetables, and you certainly wouldn't if the same bag was marked "grown in shit," which is kind of what organic means, right? Now, that's an okay joke. It's a dad joke, but it's an okay joke for me to tell in an adult, circumstance. Right. However, if I'm a third grade teacher, I probably shouldn't tell that joke to my Sunday school class, right?
Exactly.
That's probably not the way I should go on that. So
might have some parents kind of.
So that's it. That's it. Because when little Johnny or Janie gets home and tells their parents, I'm going to get in hot water, and if I lose my job, that's not cancel culture. That's all I want to say.
No, in that aspect, you're correct. Part of I think, again, this is a matter maybe of more, not just my opinion, but what I'm speaking about, what I'm about to say is purely from my point of view.
Sure.
It's hard in today's society to really say almost anything, because it appears that most things are being deemed insensitive, racist, and the sorts. Now, again, this is stuff that I'm seeing. I'm not saying this is happening 24/7, 365 all around the world, because let's face it, we speak very freely here, obviously within reason, because we don't, we're conscious of who we are and what we do. So it's to me, it's a little mind-boggling, if you will, that sometimes what sounds presumably innocent is either A, blown completely out of proportion, or B, labeled something that it truly isn't.
So I live here in Las Vegas now, right? Mm-hmm. And about a mile and a half from where I live is a cemetery with, among other graves, the grave of Red Fox. Mm. If you have never heard Red Fox Plain Brown Rapper, you really should make the opportunity to do that.
Absolutely.
That said, as Red Fox jokes would be considered tame by I have the feeling that if Red Fox heard Sarah Silverman, for example, he would go, "Can you really say that?"
Absolutely, man.
I mean, that said, we've been doing this for a long time, but Red, I'm going to pick up on something that you said, which is that by today's standards. Mm-hmm. And I want to tell you something that is a recurring theme in my chats and my lectures. I often feel that mine was like the last generation that was really taught history, certainly civics, but history, and that there's a whole bunch of stuff that you guys don't know about, mm-hmm. and that is part of America's history. So let me share one with you that you probably don't know about, and this is one of the earliest examples of cancel culture that you will ever hear. Have you guys ever heard of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle?
Yes.
The name sounds very familiar.
Fatty Arbuckle, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be wrong, wasn't he a silent movie star?
Absolutely. So in 1921, he was not only a silent movie star, he was the hottest name in comedy.
Wow.
He was the mentor for Charlie Chaplin.
Yes.
He actually, as a director, discovered Buster Keaton.
Wow.
And it was really cool at the time that you got to do multiple roles because movies were smaller. And so he was an actor, he was a director, he was a screenwriter.
Oh, wow.
Then came September 5th, 1921. Arbuckle decided to throw a party. He rented 3 rooms at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. And he invited a whole bunch of people to come and party, including a 26-year-old actress named Virginia Rappe. Last name is spelled R-A-P-P-E. So Virginia became seriously ill at the party. And the hotel doctor was summoned. He concluded that her symptoms were caused by intoxication. And bearing in mind that this was 1921, what do you do for somebody who's had too much booze to drink? You give them morphine.
What?
Not kidding. 2 days later, Virginia left the party, and 2 days later, she was admitted to the hospital. Her friend, whose name was, and again, I'm not making this up, Bambina Maud Delmont, told the doctor that Virginia had been raped by Fatty Arbuckle. The doctor examined her, found no evidence of rape, although circumstantial at best, but there was no bruising. And again, remember how women were treated and viewed in 1921. I mean, I'm trying to be really fair on this, but he found no evidence of it. Rappe suffered from chronic urinary tract infections, a condition that she often made worse through her drinking. And 2 days after her admission to the hospital, so 4 days after the original party, she died from peritonitis caused by a ruptured bladder. An autopsy was done, and they found that she had never been pregnant, nor had she ever had an abortion, which were things that they looked at that time. And Delmont, her friend, again told the police that Arbuckle had raped her friend. Virginia never said that. Her friend said that. The police then theorized that Arbuckle's weight on top of Virginia was what caused her bladder to rupture. No medical professional ever said that, nor did any medical professional ever offer an opinion whether that was even a possibility. So Rappe's manager then testified at a news conference that Arbuckle had used a piece of ice as part of a sex act with Virginia. Witnesses would later testify, and I'll get to this, that Arbuckle had in fact rubbed ice on Virginia's stomach to try to ease her pain. But later on, the story changed. That Arbuckle had raped Virginia using a Coke bottle, and again there was no evidence of this. By the way, until relatively recently, I was one of the many people that believed in the Coke bottle theory of the story, but there was zero evidence of this.
Right.
So based on her friend saying that this is what happened and her manager recounting this, Arbuckle was tried twice in court, and both of those trials ended in hung juries. A third trial then commenced. Not only did Arbuckle not only was Arbuckle acquitted, something that was pretty close to unique happened. The jury actually issued an apology to him.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Which is just like really weird. Despite this, Fatty Arbuckle was canceled, and I'll tell you why. So William Randolph Hearst was the most popular media mogul in the United States at the time, right? The newspaper guy. And he went on a crusade saying that not only had Arbuckle done this, not only was it an attack on Arbuckle, but it was further an attack on the entire corrupt and evil movie industry, which of course was run by Jews, and I mean there was just a whole bunch of things. It was,
Right.
but that's aside from the fact. But there were just a whole bunch of things. And what came out of this was the Hays Code, which for years was just simply known as the code in the motion pictures, right?
Right.
That said, Fatty Arbuckle was truly canceled. Not only did he never work again, but his movies were actually pulled. In some cases, they were destroyed. So Hollywood and the press had really done a number on him as cancel culture for a crime that if you go by juries, he did not commit. So.
Right.
What's the point of my telling the story? The point of my telling the story, first of all, Red, is that this is not a new thing. This has been part of American culture since the beginning. If you go back to the Puritans, right? So the Puritans had stockades for people that violated their ethical laws. Right. And it's funny because when you start talking about the word, and again, I'm going to come back to words and the power that they have, about profanity. The root of profanity is profane, which is the opposite of sacred. So profanity in the Puritan days included not going to church and praying all day on Sunday, right? For people that told that anything that was not part of the Puritan, the Puritan church, the Puritan religious beliefs was considered profane and could end you up in the stockades. I would have just spent my entire life there. I just would have been,
Same here.
Right.
So that's that's a little bit of a background. I mean, I'm just saying that it has always been part of American culture. So then that's the first part. Is there such a thing as cancel culture? I don't know. It's just culture to me in the sense that we've been doing it at least since 1921. You could certainly go back further than that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And whether it's from the left or the right, it hardly matters.
Exactly.
The whole idea is that people that disagree with us often suffer. People that disagree with the powers that be often suffer for that disagreement. So that's the first point that I wanted to make, and then the other one about what the words that we use. So Mitch McConnell recently made a statement that said, "My warning to corporate America is to stay out of politics," McConnell said at a news conference in Kentucky, before adding, "I'm not talking about political contributions."
Wow.
We want your political contributions. We don't want your opinions.
Just send money.
That's messed up.
And feel free to agree with me. This from a man that in 2010 said about Citizens United, a decision that reversed 100 years of campaign finance restrictions on corporations. McConnell said, "For too long, some in this country have been deprived of full participation in the political process." Mitch was not talking about people.
No.
Right.
Mitch was talking about corporations.
Right.
And about how much money you can give. Now, look, I'm perfectly willing to donate $10,000 on behalf of Night Dive Studios to any government program that will give me $20,000 back. There's an old saying, and it does not originate with me, that the definition of an honest politician is one that stays bought. So if you're in the coal industry, donating to people who support laws that allow you to pollute, that allow you to dump your residue in the streams is good business, right? You're saving money by if another politician comes up and says, hey, we really like clean air, and you guys have to spend $10 million to clean the air, and you think, well, for $500,000, I can help his opponent win the election. That makes business sense, right? And so,
Right.
I'm
It's
just saying that.
business then, not politics. It's more business than it is politics at that point.
But
Exactly.
specifically, the issue that McConnell was talking about was Georgia's laws that are at least interpreted as restricting the vote. And I should probably disclose at this point, you guys know this about me, that I'm kind of a card carrying liberal, but I've been a liberal for 40 years. I have other redeeming qualities, but I've been a liberal for 40 years and have pretty much been consistent in most of my positions. Actually, it's probably closer to 50, but I've been consistent in my positions, which means if you've been a liberal for 50 years, you're now a conservative, at least by some standards. So that said, there are things that I think that we as Americans should all agree on.
Mm-hmm.
The more people that vote, the better off we are.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone should have an easy opportunity to vote. I don't see any reason why more people will vote for American Idol than will vote for their state senator. I mean, I think that's problematic. If you're in Michigan and the election day is held on a Tuesday that you don't get off from work in November when the weather is at best uncertain, they're making it as hard on you as they can. I mean, those laws go back to a time when America, the election were laws that go back to the time that we were an agrarian country, where those laws were to accommodate farmers, that it wasn't planting season and it wasn't harvest season.
Right.
Well, that's less of an issue for me. And I'll also just bring up to you that at that same time, the only people that could vote were white male landowners.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Okay, so I don't know how you feel about it, but I was okay with those old days. No,
I'm sure you were.
but there you go, right? I mean, so Georgia enacted these laws that certainly made it more difficult, and then of course, people picked on the one about you can't give water to people that are standing outside to vote. I mean, and that's probably fair.
Yeah.
That said, it is up to corporations like Coca-Cola and Major League Baseball. They should have the right to say, we don't want to be part of this. We don't want to be associated with it. And if you want to do that, then we're going to pull out. Saying that is cancel culture, but then saying, well, I'm not going to attend an MLB game, or as Governor Abbott from Texas, said, I'm not going to throw out the first pitch for the Texas Rangers. Saying that one thing is good and the other's bad when they're pretty close. Red, go ahead. I know you're going to ask a question.
No. I was going to make a statement. I think from what I've read, a lot of people are up in arms about requiring an ID to vote. Now, that's where I'm like, okay, wait a minute. To get an apartment, to get a car, to get cigarettes, to get alcohol, there's a plethora of things you need an ID for.
Right.
So
and I'm not so
I
sure. I mean, there's a technique that we use in sales, Red, called reduction to the ridiculous. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That's where you
I
pick
have
out
not.
one thing and you pick at it.
Right.
So I'll give you other things that that are less controversial, or perhaps more controversial
Sure.
than the ID thing. If I tell you that one of the specific provisions in the Georgia law was that for people that live in rural counties, particularly the elderly that live in rural counties in Georgia, for years, for decades, they have been meeting at church and then taking a bus into a voting station. That's now prohibited.
Now, see,
I
I
could
think that's
argue on that, saying, well, it's the church thing, it's separation of church and state, but clearly, why is that being done? Because the majority of people that did that were black.
Now, so that portion of it, I think, is ridiculous. Just like the whole not being able to go out and give people water when it's hot out, people need water. Give them some freaking water.
I got you. And don't worry about it, because as far as I know, fucking water is a brand. Kind of like the organic vegetables, right? But no. And I got you on that. What you've just come to is something that we're lacking, which is
Right.
A rational approach to it. The devil is always in the details, right?
Absolutely.
But by and large, we're not going line item by line item. The
Right.
Georgia proposal rang as being racist to a number of corporations, and I am going to defend the right of those corporations to not to vote with their money. So let me just point out to you that we're on a semantic thing here, and that words do have power.
Absolutely.
That if you don't like what somebody is doing, that is cancel culture. But if you do like what they're doing, then that's a boycott. And what's the origins of that? Can I just throw out some stuff about boycotts, about how long we've been doing them?
Yeah,
So
actually, I was going to ask you about that, because it's like we talk about cancel culture and we talk about like canceling people out, but how is that different than boycott, which I think is where you're going with this, which I'm glad you're doing that. So
it absolutely is. So one of the earliest boycotts of the 20th century begins in 1915 in India. Mahatma Gandhi urges the people of India to not buy British products, but to buy similar products made in India. So he basically leads a boycott over British goods, right? So that's one example, and it's an early one. Perhaps the most famous one here in the United States begins in 1955, the year I was born, with the civil rights movement, with the Montgomery bus boycott, right? So Rosa Parks, with intent, it was not that she was tired, but Rosa Parks challenges the law by sitting in a white only seat and refusing to give that seat up. She's arrested, and so the boycott begins. And the boycott is supported by, among others, Martin Luther King Jr. So that's kind of a famous one, and that boycott spread through municipal bus districts to the South that had Jim Crow laws. Red, I'm also going to point out that the Georgia law has been termed by Stacey Abrams as Jim Crow too, showing the power of words on the other side, right? So that's 1955. In 1965, a group of Filipino farm workers in California walks off the job to protest working conditions, and Cesar Chavez leads the Hispanic workers out on strike in solidarity and for support. But more than that, more than just the strike, it becomes a famous thing of don't buy grapes.
Right.
Stop supporting the industry by not supporting grapes. So there you have some examples of it. But let me go one step further in one of the most fascinating uses of the boycott is the United States position against apartheid in South Africa. So the Reverend Dr. Leon Sullivan was an African American minister. He was also a board member of General Motors, which for times was the largest corporation in the world, and it was certainly the largest employer of blacks in South Africa. So Dr. Sullivan fought for the adoption of what became known as the Sullivan Principles, which mandated equal treatment of employees both at work and before and after work. And that was in direct contradiction to the apartheid laws of South Africa. So this began a corporate policy, a corporate boycott, what they call disinvestment by American corporations. Among places that supported the disinvestment of South Africa was Michigan State University. They were the first, but they were not the last university to say we are not investing our pension funds in corporations that do business with South Africa.
Right.
So just really interesting on the evolution of that. So why does the word boycott have so much power? Well, if you oppose boycotts, you're on the in opposition to Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, General Motors, and half the universities of America. Mm-hmm. Where it gets sticky is that you look at the apartheid policies of South Africa, and clearly, South Africa made no bones about it. They were proud to be a racist state. Mm-hmm. The only one at that time more racist than South Africa was Rhodesia. And again, you've probably gone wrong when you have to change the name of your country.
Yeah.
Just saying that, that's kind of the litmus test on that.
Right. Right.
While we agree with that, many of the same people that supported those policies against South Africa oppose disinvestment in Israel.
Yep.
And where you get into it is I don't want to position myself or for anyone. I mean, I think we all are arbiters of right and wrong, right? You vote on what you believe is right and what you think is wrong. The problem that comes up is that when disinvestment agrees with my politics, well, clearly it's
okay.
a good thing.
Yep.
When it disagrees with my politics, well, now we have a problem.
Right.
Right. So I'm gonna say this to you, Red. If you don't think that Major League Baseball should have the right to say we don't want to play the All-Star game in Atlanta, then is the corollary of that saying, well, but I can't not go to a football game because Colin Kaepernick is kneeling? I'm putting that on you, but let me bring it up the other way. If I believe that it's okay for Major League Baseball to say I don't want to support this policy that I perceive as being racist, then it's okay for the NFL to say I don't support this policy that I think is against the troops or against un-American. Yeah, that's where you get into some sticky stuff. And I'm going to
Right.
go back to what you said about the Georgia voting laws and about ID.
Mhm.
The devil is always in the details.
Right.
I'm okay with any discussion that says, I'm going to agree with this point, and that point, but I don't agree with this one, and that one. And it's hard to be nuanced.
Mhm.
And it means that you have to accept certain things. A quick story and a quick aside. I negotiate contracts.
Mhm.
That's part of what I do, and sometimes you get into some granular things. I worked for GameStop for a couple of years. GameStop is based out of Texas. Texas has some interesting laws that go back to the Wild West days.
Yep.
Texas has a law that any commerce that goes through the state of Texas is regulated by the state of Texas.
Mhm.
Now, that made sense when we were talking about wagon trains, but think about the internet. All the internet goes through the state of Texas, which meant in the 70s, for example, Texas prosecuted people for violations of community standards for what they considered pornography,
Mhm.
right? By the way, I'm not a huge fan of it, but there's one line that will live forever from the show The Deuce on HBO. It's about the seamy industry in 42nd
Mhm.
Street, and there's a scene where two organized crime figures are talking about this, and one says to the other, "Well, they've ruled that community standards are what what you use to judge whether something is pornographic or not."
Mm.
The other one kind of shakes his head and says, "So what are our community standards?" And the first guy says, "This is New York. We ain't got any."
Right.
Um, but again, how do you regulate that? Well, one of the contract negotiation tools. I mean, we wanted to have everything where, and I don't mean to throw out legal mumbo jumbo, but venue and governing law were
Mhm.
Texas, right? And often we had to negotiate about what the governing law was, and we could find a middle ground on that. But then you get up to venue. So I always used a simple principle. If if you sued us, you had to come to Texas to do that.
Mhm.
If we sued you, we had to go where your state was. After a while of doing that, I also found out that because they had bought my company's division from Michigan, we were actually chartered in Michigan. So I also used to recommend that that the venue statute be come to Michigan in February. You're going to have to really, really want to sue us to do that.
Exactly.
Um, but I used to refer to that as the principle of mutual inconvenience, right? The
Mm.
goal in it was to make sure that there were no frivolous suits. And Red, I'm going to say the same thing. We don't want to go through the details. We often want to look at something and say good or bad. I mean, that's being an American. I always used to work this into a conversation.
Right.
What are the two words that all Americans hate? It's complicated.
Exactly. Yep.
Right? We want the good guys to wear white hats and the bad guys to wear black hats, so that we don't have to do anything nuanced. And when some guy comes out with gray or paisley, we're like, I don't know.
Yep.
It's confusing. I don't know.
I think that's kind of how we are as a society too, is that,
Yeah, absolutely.
we want to be like, okay, well, this news outlet or this article said it was all about this. Well, I'm just going to take it at that because that's the easy thing. They're
Right.
telling me what
So
it is. That's the easy
You
thing.
know, you bring up community standards, and that brings up a whole another ball of wax when it comes to perceived or legit cancel culture is who governs these community standards. For example, and I'm going to give a very prime example. Okay. Full disclosure for all the viewers out here, you are about to hear some language that may not be suitable for little ears, so please plug them or mute your speakers. With that being said, I posted a video. I think it was either on Facebook or TikTok, all right? And my opening was, fuck your God. And it was pointed at certain people of certain faith, and it was a pointed conversation to stop shoving your religious beliefs down people's throats and expecting them to abide by your religious standards because it's what works for you, right? And now, with that being said, I was watching something on TikTok, and I reported it for what I perceived it to be hateful speech. However, because of who was saying it, it did not go against their community standards. Now, that is a double standard in my opinion. Okay, now hear me out. When you're going to sit there and basically bluntly say, again, pardon my mouth, fuck the police, do them harm, that's hate speech. But yet, if I come out and say, fuck your God or fuck your cause, I'm saying all of a sudden I'm saying hate speech, but you're not, because you're saying do harm to the police. Now, so the double standard in the society, I think, is part of the fuel in the fire of this cancel culture, as it's called. Go ahead.
Well, again, I mean, there's two things on that. I'm gonna say again, a more nuanced
Sure.
approach. Red, I personally, don't really have a problem with your saying it on TikTok. However, if you said it in the Baptist church on Sunday,
that would be a different story.
Location, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There's that. The other part that I would say is what is your goal? All right, where if you use that language, deep in your heart of hearts, where no BS lives, that you're doing it for the shock value. And if you do something for the shock value, you have to accept that some people are going to get, what's the word I'm looking for? Shocked.
Offended.
Offended.
Right.
I mean,
but at the same time, should they not, if they're saying the same thing, just different words, maybe even on a completely different subject, should they not be held accountable to the same rules that they're trying to essentially force on other people?
My policy personally would be for one of consistency. If you ban A, you ban B.
Right. That makes sense.
That said, you again run into nuance, and you again run into who is making the judgment about it, and how are you doing it.
Absolutely.
So, for example, we want to have a society where our kids might not be exposed to a woman's breasts.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to have, and again, obscenity or not obscenity, it depends on the location, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. But on the other hand, we want to be able to have educational films about breastfeeding.
Right.
Right. So you come to nuance. Let me go back though onto consequences, and let me also go back onto capitalism. One of the things that infuriates people over and over again is the misunderstanding of what the First Amendment says. Right? The First Amendment says that the government should not regulate speech. On the other hand, if you're on my site, if it's my bat and my ball, I get to decide whether you're out at first or not. Right. You can choose not to play ball anymore with me, and that's fine.
Right.
That's your right. Neither of those things is cancel culture. That is capitalism in action. Now, hold on just 1 second. I just want to say, if I own the site and I say, I don't like what you're doing, you can feel free to leave. And if enough people leave, then my site is no longer economically feasible. On the other hand, there are standards of things that have to be imposed.
Sure.
So, for example, I'm not really very popular. I'm not really. No, I'm not popular either. But I'm not really very supportive of the Daily Stormer.
I can't imagine why not.
Daily Stormer.
It's a white nationalist forum.
It is.
Gross!
It is the
like the old Storm Blast crap.
Yes.
Yeah, it's bad.
Okay.
I'm going to go one step further. One of the great ironies of this time, it's not only a white nationalist forum, it's also a singles place where white nationalists can meet other white nationalists. Okay, so I'm just saying.
Yeah.
They really do have. I've read about that. I have never. But anyway. I do not believe. I do not want to support them. On the other hand, I would not support a law that would unequivocally ban them. But if it turns out that the Daily Stormer has a large forum called "Let's All Kill the Jews on Tuesday at 6 p.m., that's probably a violation of some law, right?
It would definitely be a cause for a
different line. It's crossing a line of legality. It's crossing a line, not just that it's offensive and it's wrong, but it's.
And the same thing
legally wrong.
The same thing goes throughout a lot of this stuff. So, Red, let's go back to the election law and IDs and that. I don't want to get bogged down on the ID thing because that's not the whole of the law. We're not. I mean, that's not the whole of the law that Georgia passed, and people might be accepting of that, but not. And again, what we're talking about the IDs, may change. If, for example, if you say that you have to have a driver's license to vote, then you're kind of discriminating against people that don't drive. But that aside, but then it turns out that there's no place to get a driver's license within 100 miles of these rural areas, and these rural areas are 98% black or Hispanic or whatever minority or white, right? That blonde-haired white people just can't get this thing and therefore can't vote. Especially if it's a federal election, now you're violating the federal law, and that's problematic. Let me go up and say personally, I think we it's time for us to scrap our arcane voting system. I think that that biometrics and phone is just fine. I think that you can get to or computer. The problem that comes up with that is, again, I got 3 computers in this room. I only put my cover back on that one because I was going to have company. but I mean, again, if you say that and you show that by doing that you are disenfranchising a large segment of the population that doesn't have access to that, that's problematic. I mean, what we want to do is we want to have as many people vote as possibly can.
Right.
And that should be our guiding principle. But again, there are laws about this. Let me also say historical perspective, that in the United States we have a long and documented history of things like the poll tax, of measures that were the state that I'm going to pick on, where my daughter lives, it's a wonderful, lovely state, is North Carolina. When people that passed laws say on camera, we passed these laws to make sure that black people don't vote, right? You know about Governor Gary? Do you know about that?
I can't say I do.
I don't think so.
Governor Gary, back in the 19th century, reapportioned his state map. He drew these weird voting districts, and somebody looked at it and said, "That looks like a salamander." And somebody said it's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander, and that's the origin of that term.
Oh, really?
It's just geometry, right? You can
Right.
you can divvy up a state, you can divvy up state voting lines so that it gives one political party an unfair advantage.
Right.
Right, so that all the Democrats in a state, the state might be 50-50, but the Democrats only get to elect 25% of the elected representatives, and the Republicans, etc. That kind of stuff is unfair. There was a case recently where the incumbent redrew the district lines right before a primary so that his opponent no longer lived in the area where he was running.
Of course.
If you ever take a look at the Texas voting districts, it'll explain why Ted Cruz keeps on getting elected. You wouldn't think that Austin would do that, but it seems that parts of Austin are in Dallas and parts are in Houston for voting purposes. I mean, we've done those kinds of things. I think that at the end of the day, stuff that most Americans would agree on is just scrap that stuff. Just
Right.
scrap all the districting and just say you vote for the people in the area that you want to vote for. I mean, those things were done for political purposes. Quote from Louis L'Amour, the old Western writer, about doing things unfairly. He said, "They ain't a horse that can't be rode, and ain't a rider that can't be throwed." And the simple thing is, no matter what the mechanism is, somebody can figure out a way to game it.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to life. I mean, no matter what, it is never going to be foolproof. It is never going. I mean, we're human. We screw up. We make mistakes. Some on purpose, some not. And so there's always I think what people forget is there's always going to be a human aspect to it.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. You can
And
do the best you can.
fallibility is one thing. Fallibility is one thing. I'm just going to say that cheating is another.
Oh,
Right,
absolutely.
and it
No, I agree.
becomes obvious. I'm going to go back to the original thing, my original mea culpa, my confession about telling jokes that even by the standards of that day were inappropriate. You knew that I mean, I don't want to go old Jiminy Cricket, but you knew they were inappropriate because you didn't tell that joke about Bob's group when Bob was around.
Right.
Right? If you find yourself whispering the joke, you probably shouldn't tell it, at least not in the office. Right? I mean, so those kinds of things, I mean, we know about that. Let's take the case of Louis C.K. All right, and Louis C.K., exposing himself to people, and that's not open to negotiation. That's not open to, I thought it was okay. Right? I mean, we kind of, if you're over the age of 4, to pull your pants up, right? I mean, that's just, that's just the way it is.
Right.
So, with that said, a lot of the stuff that we talk about with cancel culture, I mean, I get it. If you're on one side, there are things that are complicated. Again, a boycott of South Africa, yay, we're fighting apartheid. A boycott of Israel, BDS or Israel, got to think about that one. I do believe that there are certain principles in America that really make sense, right? No shouting fire in a crowded movie theater. Those kinds of things. Look, I was watching. I was watching the demonstrations out of Minnesota last night. And I understand about being angry. I understand that. I mean, seriously, it is probably, how do you explain how bad things are in America in 2021 We had to interrupt the coverage of the trial of a police officer who shot an unarmed black man to talk about a police officer who shot an unarmed black man 10 miles away, right? I mean, that's where we're at. I understand that, but I'm going to go on the other side. I mean, nobody thinks that throwing a soda can at the police is okay. Nobody's like, well, I'm sorry, I thought it was free speech, right? I mean, that's not in our lexicon. You may feel that you have no other option to make your voice heard than that, and I get that. I know the Martin Luther King, a riot is a demonstration that you're unheard, that there's no other way to do that, and I understand that. It's still not okay. That you are violating the laws. Let me also go back and say this. I think January 6th was a turning point in America, and I said that in my last presentation, that it was a wake-up call for us, right? And you have to look at some of the social media and where's free speech and what's not free speech. And that's where it comes into this. Yes, great question about not offended by the same thing, and let me speak on that, but let me go back to January 6th for a second. There's stuff that it does not require nuance. Spraying bear spray at Officer Sicknick is not something that I thought it was okay. No. In no one's lexicon, no one's mind. Do you think that's okay? Let me address the issue about what's offensive and what's not offensive. And I don't mean to dodge that community standards thing, but there's stuff that contributes to harm. There's stuff that we all can agree on, or that most of us can agree on. Most of us, right? And I reference this about reduction to the ridiculous, about picking out one thing that's at the extreme and focusing on that. Let me just say that if something is harmful, if you are advocating violence towards another group, if you are advocating people that advocate rape, whatever form it is in online, there's that. The other part that I think is a governing principle is capitalism, which is to say if the majority of people in the United States are willing to support something and a minority aren't, well, that's majority rule, right?
Unfortunately,
there's stuff that has to be legally done. I don't care whether some particular community. You guys know that child pornography is not illegal in St. Petersburg, Russia, right? You knew that.
I didn't know it, but it doesn't surprise me.
Unfortunately. All right, so St. Petersburg has got a nice little industry of it's not for them. It's if you have a server that's serving child pornography, and it's in St. Petersburg, you can't So I'm just going to say that if I say I'm barring child pornography, or I'm barring servers that have an IP address or a range in St. Petersburg because I think that they might be hosting this, or I know that they are, that's not cancel culture, guys. I mean, let's be real about this.
Right.
If I say that Louis C.K. has offended me and I don't want to watch his show, that's not cancel culture.
Right.
All right. If you say, I think Louis C.K. is still funny, in fact, I think he's even funnier now, I just wish he wasn't wearing pants all the time, and you want to vote for him with your pocketbook, he did pay-per-view, he did online, and blew through all kinds of records on that, right? The law isn't stopping him from doing that. I just have the right to say I don't want to host him on my site.
Right.
Right, but now with that being said, there are so many people, and I'm gonna utilize both sides of the political spectrum here. The left is going to say, "Hey, I don't like what the right is saying, so we need to shut them down." But yet, if the right says that, it's the left is screaming fascism, fascism. You're a fascist when you're trying to totally shut down what
Red,
someone
where are
of
we
the
shutting
opposing
them
side
down?
is
If
saying.
you're saying it's Twitter rules, or if you're saying
I'm
it's
not. I'm
Facebook
not
rules,
talking. I'm not.
the,
I'm not talking anything
the,
on social media. I'm talking period. In
uh,
general,
uh,
there is such an uproar when a conservative will say something, and if it doesn't go with someone else's agenda, they lose it. Right. However, if the tables are turned, it gets deemed racist or labeled something, or they'll
are
say,
you
"Hey,
saying that? Are you saying that the words racist hurt you?
not at all,"
Okay, and
because
because you're
I
not.
know I'm
I mean,
not. I'm
again, I'm distinguishing between two things. There are no laws prohibiting offensive, that type of offensive speech. There are no laws in that. But if I own the social media platform,
I'm
what
not talking
basically
social
Right.
media here.
basically what I'm saying,
I'm
but
talking
basically what I'm saying is you can't make me have you come into my house and insult me. You can stay in your house and insult me all you want, but you can't come into my house. Now, if you say, yeah, but Larry, you got a much nicer house. First of all, you'd be wrong. But second of all, but second of all, that's the way economics works. I mean, again, I'm going to come back and say Donald Trump got kicked off of Twitter. But
I
but the
think
federal government didn't shut him down,
correct. The big
right?
thing is that we forget, like, there is a difference. Like, when I talk about cancel culture, when I mention cancel culture, um, much like all of us have been talking about, like, it's very nuanced and it's very semantics because words do matter.
Yeah.
But the thing is like you said, I can choose whether or not I want this to come into my home. I can choose whether or not I turn the TV on or I go on Twitter or Twitch or any other social media platform. They can decide whether or not they want whatever I'm promoting on their channel or on their platform. But the big thing, at least for me, is like, when I talk about cancel culture, I mean, it's very nuanced because you can't, much like with many other things, you can't paint it with a broad brush. You can, but it's so nuanced. Much
If I
like,
go to see a comedian and the comedian makes a joke about pedophilia, I'm probably walking out.
mhm,
And I probably won't pay to see that person again. And I'll tell all my friends not to go see that person. And that's
which
okay.
is your right to do.
If that same comedian makes a joke about racism, my reaction might be the same on that, or will be the same on that. But not everyone that agreed with me on the first thing, well, pedophilia is wrong, but racism's okay because that was funny. Just say it. And
Right. Some
and
people
let me
might not see it the same way.
I will I mean there are jokes to be said on both sides of that. But that said, again, what we're talking about when we're talking about cancel culture is where is it being canceled?
Mhm.
If the means of communication today are privately owned,
Right.
right? I mean, Twitter's a company. Twitch is part of Amazon, right? Um,
Right.
if you come out and say, well, it's not fair, Jeff Bezos is has more gold than than is imaginable, um, and he owns Amazon, and he doesn't like my opinion. Well,
He could really care less if you like his opinion or not, because
I mean,
it
I
is.
just look at
Right.
that and say it's billionaires fighting with trillionaires,
Yeah.
right? Those are things that I think are nuanced. When you get into Mitch McConnell's position, about just send money, and I'm not talking about political contributions. I think Mitch is 100% wrong, and I would vote against it. I think that that corporations can have whatever opinion they want and should really state what their opinions are, or don't have to, but
Right.
that's fine. I just don't think they should be able to give money to politicians.
Right. Well, and the thing is too is that, like, you know, the cancel culture, you know, it can go for politics, it can go for, you know, pretty much anything having to do with humans in general. Like, and like I said before, like, there is a big difference between accountability and trying to cancel somebody out completely. Not just cancel them so their voice isn't heard, but I mean, you go to deplatforming, to all sorts of things. If you try to completely cancel somebody's opinion, now,
Let me
if they're
let me
being
let me let me
illegal,
push
that's different.
let me push
Go ahead.
back on that and say we live in an age, particularly it's funny, in this year of 2021, there are more alternatives. There are more alternative platforms. So if you say
Oh
that
yeah,
somebody has been canceled off of Twitter, well, there's Gab,
there's so many
right? I
different
mean,
things. Yeah. Yep.
and I think that again, that's a real difference. I think,
Mhm.
I think that when we're talking about it being canceled, let's go back to It Happened on Mulberry Street, Dr.
Right.
Seuss book, right? I read that book to both of my kids. I'm from New York originally. You can certainly hear my New York accent when I say certain words. It's a quarter.
Right. Right.
I went to the library. That said, I read that to both of my kids, and I don't believe that it I don't believe it was a terrible thing. On the other hand, you look at some of the images of the stereotypes, and I find it offensive. When the estate of Dr. Seuss, the Theodore Gesell, says we don't want to sell this anymore, that's their right. And when people
Mhm.
say, "Oh, that's cancel culture because I want to read it," well, go read it. They didn't make all the copies disappear. The thing
Right.
still exists. You can go find it. I just don't want to sell it anymore.
Right.
I run
And that's
into
their
this all
right.
the time. I run into this all the time, where a particular store asks for one of my games, and either for contractual reasons, some of my IP is licensed, some of it just doesn't work. But beyond that, I have the right to say this is mine, and I don't want to sell it there.
Mhm.
If that decision, I've never made a political decision on that. I'm not ruling out that day could come.
Right.
If the Daily Stormer says to me, if KKK.org or whatever their website is or whatever says, "Hey, we're opening up a new games division and we want to put some of your games on there," my answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
I don't. And again, I'm not trying to make it ridiculous. I'm just simply saying to you that what we're talking about canceling the person, that really doesn't happen. Louis C.K. made more money on his own than he was making touring before.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I will say Bill Cosby committed, crimes, and I mean, here's a thing for you that I saw recently, that there's a sentiment that women claim rape to be famous, but nobody can name the 60 victims that came up against Bill Cosby. That said, Bill Cosby's job, the Bill Cosby Show, was he was America's dad. Yeah, that kind of went away.
Right.
Oh
yeah.
That's not
Definitely.
something that we on the left did to him. That's something that, now, to Red's point, and I get it. If you say that, well, the playing field isn't level, that there are perhaps more people that feel this way. If you say that the tech bros that control a lot of the media today are lean towards the left rather than the right, yeah, that's probably the way it is. I'm going to go back and point out to you that at one time, William Randolph Hearst was the biggest media mogul in America, and he was a right-leaning bigot.
Mm.
That's just the way it is. The only thing that I can say is that while that's offensive, I'm gonna probably wind down, and I do want to take questions, and I do want, but I just want to as a summary say what I hope people in our audience got from tonight. One is that we had a civil debate. Red and I feel very different. I mean, you used the word respect at the very beginning of it. Whatever differences there may be between us, Red, one thing is we have the same barber.
Very good one at that.
I mean, that's part of. We do have that civil debate, and that's what's important. If you approach with respect, it will not be 100% of the time, but very often the person will engage in a debate in a forum with you. Sometimes if you find out about the other person, Red, we've talked about gun control a couple of times, and I'm going to bring up my friend. I'll give a shout out to Brian Bruning. Brian's been a good friend of mine for many years. I'm glad that Brian brought up that he's a gun owner. It's funny, that comes up. That said, one of the things that's missing in America today is the desire to achieve consensus. The majority of NRA members agree on the same principles about ID checks, about background checks. How much could we eliminate? How many lives could we save if we said, if you've committed a felony, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun anywhere, whether it's at a show or not. You shouldn't.
Okay,
be
so
able to.
I'm sorry. I want to interject to those who have never been to a gun show. Do not assume that it is easy to just walk into some big gun show and buy a gun, because it's not. A good portion of the sellers
it depends
there.
on what state, and often the exceptions that are done are violating the rules of both the show and about the state laws.
Right. Most of the states that I have visited and been to gun shows at, most of the people selling there they have the 4473, which is the federal background check, which is done by the ATF. Religiously, and I used to sell firearms for a gun store, so these aren't, more often than not, the criminals are getting these guns private sale off the streets, and that's something that, unless you take guns completely away, in theory, it's not ever going to stop.
So one of the sources, I mean, again, there's a body of evidence on this, and this is stuff. Again, this discussion is exactly what we should be having. There are a number of gun shops. I believe that they usually have 6 that contribute to the majority of illegal firearms. And what they do is they use straw dogs. They will sell the guns to Mexico, and the guns will then be shipped back to the United States for illegal sales. We know that.
Right.
And those are exactly. Those are exactly the kinds of things, Red, that you and I could sit down and go through on a nuance. This would be the benefit of doing this. Most of the stuff doesn't require even new laws. It requires enforcement of the current laws. And I say to people, look, I'm not trying to stop 100% of them. Right. But if I could save one life, I'm okay with it. That seems to make sense to me. Again, it's reaching consensus through debate.
Right.
And the kernel of that is always respect.
Absolutely.
I don't need to be on shows where, I mean, I'm glad that you and I have well-reasoned and respectful disagreements. I don't need to be on. I don't need to be in an echo chamber.
Right.
I don't.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. I mean, that's the problem with the algorithm on social media, that it's going to show me more things that will,
Right.
if I'm to the left, it's going to push me further to the left.
Yep.
And if I'm to the right, it's going to push me further to the right. And
It pushes your
you're not
true
wrong.
throughout.
finger.
I mean, that's stuff that we can talk about. And again, when you talk about these corporations, I mean, it's not governed under First Amendment, but I think that we can talk about the most good for the most people.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
those are things that by and large Americans can agree on.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That is, you're 100% correct on that. Unfortunately, something I've noticed a very disturbing trend, talking about social media, is you're right. If you follow one thing, it'll steer you further that direction or this direction or up or down or left or right, whatever. And unfortunately, that is breeding more extremism, which, as you know, Larry, we at Beyond Barriers are trying to combat on a regular basis, and it's unfortunate. And this is where we can start dismantling the ties of extremism, is by this open dialogue, when the general public can tune in and they can ask questions. And that's one thing I love about being able to talk like this, because let's face it, this isn't a common occurrence every day. Right.
When I was on that show, and I know you guys have linked to it, when I talked about my involvement with Beyond Barriers, it's funny. One of the things I didn't get, so I was hosted on a show with a rabbi and a Jewish media commentator out here in Las Vegas, and they both said, "Why are you talking to neo-Nazis?" And I said, "I'm not. I'm talking to former neo-Nazis to begin with." I said, but I said, again, the answer to extremism is not silence, is not, that just drives people in more. But
exactly.
But after the show was over, I said to them, you're asking the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be asking me as a Jew, why am I talking to former neo-Nazis? You should say, wow, what didn't I understand about former neo-Nazis that they're willing to talk to a Jew?
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And I want to kind of go on record as to say thank you to, first of all, to everybody who's tuned in and putting up with our jibber jabber. It's amazing. The fact that all these people show up and listen to us. It's amazing. And Larry, I love our conversations, man. Regardless of the fact whether we agree, disagree, or even meet in the middle. It's, if nothing else, it helps one another learn something from someone else, right? And we've said it more than once tonight, and it does come back to respect, and it comes back to, we don't have to agree 100% on everything. We can still be respectful, and we can still love one another as human beings. And this open dialogue is, I feel, step number 1 through 10, even. That is a major part that is missing in our society.
Do we have enough time? I've got more energy than I thought I would. Do we have enough time to take some questions? I
have a few more minutes available. Acacia, I don't see on here. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, if you're hearing us, Acacia, do we have a little bit more time, or where are we?
Yeah,
sitting here?
we've got more time. I mean, technically, we have as much time as we want to take.
However,
I
see Wings and Halo saying we have all this happening with cancel culture, but the big question I have is how do we change this trend and realize that not everyone is offended by the same thing, and by catering to one, you offend another. First of all, I just want to say I'm offended by that. No, I'm okay. but no, I think that's a great question, and I think that at the core of it, I really and truly do believe that if you take a completely diverse audience and you showed them 100 statements, they wouldn't agree on and ask them to judge offensive, non-offensive. I don't think that they would agree on 100% of the time.
Right.
But boy, I bet you that they'd agree on more than 50%. I think that they would look at that. I think that they would look at let me give you an example, just one, it won't offend anyone using this as an example. The stereotype picture of the Chinese fellow from Mulberry Street from the Dr. Seuss book that had buck teeth and had I think that if you showed that to 100 people, 75% would go, yeah, that's offensive. Maybe it would be higher than that. Maybe it would be 90%. I think that those kinds of things. I go back to some of the stereotypes of African Americans. If you showed that to people today, and again, it may not have been offensive in 1908, but in 2021, yeah, we pretty much agree on that stuff. So I think that that's part of it. And I also think that we've kind of come to court decisions on that, on community standards. All right. What is offensive in Alabama might not be offensive in Michigan. What is offensive in Michigan might not be offensive in Alabama. And so you have those standards. But truly, I think that we have, look, I won't tell you what I think of Tucker Carlson. Hypocrite is the least of it, but
yeah, we probably won't see eye to eye on that one.
Most people on the left aren't saying the government should ban Tucker Carlson. The statement of, if you're a sponsor of his show, I won't buy your product, is the same thing that leads people to pay for the sponsorship in the first place. It's the corollary of it, saying, well, I want to appeal to this audience, so right, I'm going to advertise on a show that appeals to it. I mean, I think that that's capitalism in action. You vote with your pocketbook.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
That's I just want to distinguish between, we've talked about boycott and cancel culture. I just want to distinguish between, you don't have to buy everything.
Correct.
I'm probably not going to buy the Pillow Guy's pillows, right? I mean, that's just, now, to be honest with you, I wasn't going to buy his pillows anyway. But I mean, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. But that said, I think that's okay. I don't think that we should try to fix that.
Right. And we have another question here. Somebody asked, for our listeners that aren't able to view this, can you address the vigilante aspect of cancel culture? Many people believe movements such as Me Too are a positive force for change. But as we have seen, for example, with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp scandal, the facts, quote unquote, that make the media often don't tell the whole story. Now, this person also said that's not his favorite example, but it does illustrate what he's trying to ask.
No, and I'll take that. I'll take that up. I think, again, before the show began, I told a quote from Mark Twain that Mark Twain said there are three kinds of lies: a lie, a damn lie, and a statistic. And that said tongue in cheek. But I think, for example, I don't really follow I know vaguely about Johnny Depp, and I think there's two things on there. One is it is difficult to prove that abuse didn't happen, and it is difficult to prove that abuse did happen. In religious law, and it was Sharia law at one time, and I again, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that there was this part that an accusation of rape was only considered justifiable if there was a witness to it. Mm-hmm. Let me rephrase that: if there was a male witness to it, because women couldn't testify in court. And again, I don't want to get into reduction to the ridiculous. I don't want to do that. But I think when you look at the statistics, the majority of times that somebody is accused of abuse, that there is a preponderance of evidence on that. Does that mean that it's 1,000% true? No. And that's why I picked the Fatty Arbuckle case by intent,
Right.
because here was somebody that was accused of rape, and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence that it didn't happen.
Correct.
And beyond that, there were trials. If after 3 chances to try to convict the guy, if the last one resulted in the jury issuing an apology to him, then you were probably wrong.
Right.
I picked that with this question in mind. I think that the majority of times these accusations tend to be founded.
Mm-hmm.
The difficult part comes in. Distinguishing between consensual and non-consensual, and that's one of those. Were you there? That said, fortunately, I don't have to be the judge or the jury in that. Right.
Right.
Again, it's it.
Well,
What was
I
her
want to
name?
interject
Lorena
here real
Bobbitt.
quick.
Was her name
Yep.
Lorena Bobbitt? That that the polite term that emasculated her husband.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe his last words were a little bit off the top, please. You're gonna have to have me back from my humor show, but
Right.
Yes.
but that said, why did that case get so much coverage? The reason that the case got so much coverage is because there are 30,000 incidents of domestic violence in America every year, and yet those on the other side could hold up this one example and say, "Well, women do it too." Okay.
Right.
We've had the case of Tawanna Brawley back in New York, and it's not the only one, but certainly these are rare, who claimed she was raped and branded. I mean, there was a whole backstory, and it was made up out of whole cloth. Again, those are the exception. Let's not try to fix something that isn't broken 99.9% of the time.
Right.
Hope that's
Well,
a fair example.
I think what Scott was saying, he said, who is right or wrong is not really the relevant, isn't what he was asking. It's pretty much that vigilantes don't wait for trials or testimony. They just act on what they think they know or what they've been told. And I will say this, and then I'll let you speak, Red and Larry, is that there's a difference between saying, you know what, I choose not to buy this product for myself, or I choose not to watch this actor or this actress. I choose not to do this or that. But for me at least, when you try to either cancel out history, you try to cancel out the person and not, like I said, and we've talked about this earlier, there's so many nuances. If you are deliberately trying to cancel a person, meaning they can't get a job anywhere, like, to sum it up, we are all humans. We all have a choice as to whether or not we want to watch something, whether we want it enter our house or not, or whether we want to support it. For me, at least, when we try to take history away, and when we try to literally make it so that a person can't survive because we don't agree with them, not necessarily because they actually did something wrong. There's a difference. There are consequences to our choices, to the things that we decide to do. And whether that's good or bad, we have to know that every choice we make will have a consequence. Me choosing to have this show, people might not agree with me, and people might be like, you know what? I'm not going to watch you because you're crap. Okay, that's your choice. Or because somebody had a pass, Red's got a pass, I've got a pass, everybody's got a pass. And if they choose to judge me because of that, that's their choice. But the problem I see with it, where it comes in, is that we have a lot of society, especially here in America, but everywhere, that because I don't agree with you, you are the enemy. It becomes an us versus them. And that, for me at least, is where it irks me to no end of this cancel culture, and
Yeah.
how it's like you suddenly are not a human being because I don't agree with you.
And I've seen that. I think the media plays a huge part in that. Now, and bear with me as I stumble through this. There used to be a thing as unbiased journaling, at least so it appears. Okay, I think that. Yeah, I know where you're going.
Right.
Now, the other thing that I think drives that is a driving factor with some of this vigilantism and so forth does come from social media. There are sometimes news stories or stories in general that are shared that maybe all the facts aren't presented, whether it's to try to fit a narrative or not. Sometimes it's somebody posting something without knowing all the facts. I know I myself have been very guilty of that on a very regular basis, and I know there's people that call me out on it all the time. And you know what? I'm glad they do, because that helps me learn, right? So I think if we can, as a whole, okay, I don't give two shits about the political spectrum at this point, but as a society as a whole, as a people, can agree on something, to be factual in what we're saying, right? This could really go down a rabbit hole that I'm not going to go down, but yeah.
So let me bring up 2 points. First of all, more immediate. Read about that apolitical and unbiased journalism. I'm only 65, so I don't remember that. Let me go back and tell you. There's a quote. I don't know if it's true, but it may be apocryphal. I mentioned William Randolph Hearst. The American warship, the Maine, blew up in Havana Harbor.
Yes.
And we don't know to this day whether it was a boiler room explosion or something more insidious.
Right.
And I believe this is an apocryphal story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Supposedly, Hearst said to the reporter, his man on the ground in Cuba, he said, "Get me the pictures for the war." And the reporter said, "How do you know that there's going to be a war?" And Hearst responded saying, "You get me the pictures and I'll get you the war." That might have been an apocryphal story, but
right.
I suggest you look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident with the USS Maddox and what we know to be the facts, and that got us into the second longest war in American history, prior to Afghanistan, right? So
Right.
That said, I mean, I do not believe that. I also want to point out that there's an element not of political correctness. It's not that, but there's an element of our prurient interests. See, the thing about rape is it makes a great story.
Unfortunately, a lot of people.
And you know what the oldest saying in the newspaper business is? The oldest saying in the newspaper business is, "If it bleeds, it leads."
Right. And sensationalism sells, unfortunately, and oftentimes with that, unfortunately, that can lead to misinformation being passed. I'm not going to use the term.
If we can show a good-looking woman and we have blood, I mean that's like
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong. It's no different than in Hollywood or on TV, for that matter. Sex.
The other thing that I was going to say, and I don't mean to challenge my lovely host on this, but about people's lives being destroyed. How many millions of dollars does Johnny Depp have left? Do you think he needs $5 from me?
See, I'm not talking personally. I'm not talking about the
I know,
ones in Hollywood. But you are. I understand what you're saying.
but again, I mean, we talk about this and we say, well, I don't want to see people's lives being destroyed. But if I ask you to show me where somebody's lives were destroyed, I mean, there are cases. There are
I could
cases
give you
of
plenty.
people who've been driven to suicide. There are cases.
Yep.
But if you take a look at, Fatty Arbuckle died at age 46. He never worked again after this, and he died at age 46. I want to say from a heart attack, which may have been caused by the fact that he was Fatty Arbuckle, not Slim and Healthy Arbuckle, right?
Right.
I'm just saying.
That's probably more due to health concerns than it would be cancel culture. But anyways, go ahead.
But again, again, when we start talking about this, I mean, I can offer plenty of cases. I mean, geez, after the accusations started coming out on heart, I teach a lot of classes in Jewish culture, and I always say this, that if you want to claim Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, you get those, but you also end up with Harvey Weinstein and Epstein in there,
Right.
and the now late Bernie Madoff with all your money, Bernie. That it's all part of that package deal. If you start looking at the other side of it, about people we knew that they were bad and toxic,
Mm-hmm.
and yet their careers went on for years, for decades. I think that there are far more of them than the people that you can say were injured by cancel culture. Just putting that out there.
Well, and that's why I make the distinction between Hollywood figures being quote unquote canceled and your average everyday person being canceled, because I have known people that have been canceled because of their past that no longer, and you know that.
And you know what? I will just say it just sucks to be poor and disenfranchised in America.
It does.
And that, I mean, that's true for everybody. That said, I want to say something that is a kind of bridge thing. And Red, this is really for you. I have been working. I'm in the games industry. Everybody knows that.
Right.
I have been involved in speaking out, and not I say speaking out as though it was something radical, but about talking about the politics of games, about talking about what's the impact of this, what do we learn from this. There's that Fallujah game out now. That's 6 days in Fallujah, something along those.
I know the one you're
that
talking
people
about.
are saying this game shouldn't be sold, and my feeling is more or less on that. You're right. I'm certainly not going to buy it, but what should dictate that is just don't buy it. Right. I mean, that if it's not violating standards, and I haven't played it enough to know if it's not violating standards,
right.
The first overtly political game that I worked on was in 2004. Shout out to my friends over at Stardock. It was the Political Machine.
Okay.
Right. And it was the first of a series. Every 4 years, Stardock does the Political Machine, and it's a political simulation game. It has some really interesting stuff. It has sliders and what are popular. That's it.
Really?
It's you're running from.
I'm actually kind of intrigued now. But anyways.
Yeah, and really, give a shout out on that. It's an interesting thing. It's worth learning about. That said, since that time, I have been involved as the liberal coming on into conservative sites. And I will say this, whether it's a quality of my personality, because I am at the end of the day charming. But for whatever it is, whether it's the fact that I approach it with respect, whatever the thing is, I have been welcomed far more. I can't tell you. I mean, it would be less than the fingers of one hand of the time people have said, no, we don't agree with you. We're not going to have you on as a guest or as a speaker.
Right.
What I have found in more cases is when my liberal friends find that I don't agree with them 100%, that they're not that they're dismissive or that they cancel me by any means,
Right.
but that they're shocked about that.
Mhm.
I don't care much for Ronald Reagan, but one quote of his that I use fairly often is, it's not what liberals don't know that gets them in trouble. It's what they don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
That said, I'm going to hammer home just one last point at 7:55. Some 14 hours, 7:56 now. So 14 hours after my day started today, but I think that one of the truths that the algorithm on social media really hides is that on the majority of stuff that is really important, we all agree. And I don't mean even just Americans. I mean worldwide, the stuff that is really value, centered. I think the majority of us agree on that. I said that was going to be the last point. I have one other thing. I have a buddy. I don't know if I told you this. We had used this scary word about Marxist culture once before. And
Right.
I'm first generation American. My father was born in Russia. It was even before the Soviet Union. My father was born in Tsarist Russia. He came over to the United States in 1911. My grandfather came over to the United States in 1908. He had fled a Siberian labor camp. My grandfather's name in Yiddish was Yankel the Anarchist, was Jack the Anarchist,
Oh wow.
Jack the Red. All right, and his appreciation of Marxism came from the fact that he grew up in a society where there were still serfs, where people were bought and sold, right? So when you look at the origins of of Russian communism or Chinese communism or Cuban communism, you have to understand what went before that. And if you look at that and you say, well, Russian communism was pretty awful, and certainly as I've pointed out, we didn't do too well under Stalin. That wasn't a great trade up for us, right?
No.
They're still finding mass graves that are left over from that area. You talked about Cambodia and about Pol Pot, right? Again, I mean, not a good thing. But that you have to look at history as the ebb and flow. When you study history, one of the things that you will find is that there really, really has been progress, and that things that we look at as being terrible right now probably aren't so bad in the grand scheme of things. I say this about COVID, and I do not mean to treat this lightly, but and I'm certainly, if I've had my 2 shots of Pfizer, and that wasn't enough for me, so I also had a flu shot on top of it. I figure suspenders and a belt can't hurt, right? That said, as awful as this global pandemic has been, let's just remember that during the Black Death, 1/4 of France died. So things are progressing, and we should bear that in mind. As we talk about people on the stuff that really matters, most of us would agree on what's important.
Right. No, I would agree with that. Like it's a lot of it is about finding the common ground. I know somebody mentioned, about so where was it? Sorry. Asking, well, because most of the time cancel culture gets the bad guy, we should tolerate the few that get hurt. No, it's more about
yeah, that's not the American system of justice either. Here's a quote that I saw recently, and I kind of like this. The difference between a liberal and a conservative. A liberal wants to feed 100 people because one of them might be starving. A conservative wants to deny food to 100 people because one of them might not be starving.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
I don't know
But
if I
will
agree with it either.
I'll agree to disagree.
I don't know if I agree with that either. But I do think that that what underlies that is we should err on the side of forgiveness.
Gotcha.
That's what I think is
the important piece to grab from it. And I think so. I think, a lot of times, and I really appreciate you coming on because obviously, yeah, we do agree on a lot of different fronts. And there's other fronts that we're just not going to agree on, or we agree with certain aspects of it. And that's okay. But the fact that, and there's even things, both Red and I probably tend to lean more on the conservative side, but there's still things that he and I wouldn't agree on. So
absolutely. I mean,
we're all human. We're all different.
I tell you what, there's friends of mine that are very hardcore Christian conservatives that no longer speak to me because I don't fit into that category. Yeah, I do lean a little more to the right. However, there's a lot on the left that I tend to agree with. And it really it confuses people, and it's kind of fun, to be honest with you. But
it shows that politics is not what makes the person. The fact that somebody's more liberal, more conservative, more whatever, we're all individual human beings, and that is what we should ultimately. Well, it's kind of like what you were saying, Larry, as far as like, there's always going to be the nuances. So what is really the most important thing? Like, I grew up very conservative Christian, thank God for the parents that I have that like they raised me with really good values and instilled in me really good things. There are things that obviously we don't agree on now because I'm definitely more liberal in many aspects, but it's the fact that we still can get along. I still love them. They're still my parents. I might not agree with everything, but I guess where I'm going with this is that I know there was a point in time that I can look back at, and I can look at, certain individuals and be like, well, I'm not a Christian. I'm not conservative. So I'm going to they're going to snub their nose at me. And that's not right either, because we are the fact that we all have our own brain and we all think differently. And the fact that we can come together, and there's always going to be things. No two people are alike. Even I have cousins that are identical twins. They're identical in a lot of their features, to which, they're, oh my goodness. Yeah. They're probably, sorry. I'm like, how old are they? Yeah. They're probably in their, too. they're like in their 40s. Well, it just reminds me of how old I'm getting. Which So it's like, they're even in their like 40s now, and I still have a hard time telling them apart, and I've grown up with them, but I can tell them apart by their mannerisms, by the different things that they like. Say
you just bring up a Fox News logo and the one that growls,
Right? Exactly.
Guys, I love you. Thank you very much for having me on. And I'm gonna pack it in. Tomorrow's going to be another long day, and let me just say, thus endeth the sermon. Thank you again for having me on as a guest.
Thank you so much. Guys, definitely follow Larry. Follow Larry on Twitter. And also, I definitely want to give a shout out to the new game, and I'll let you give that shout out.
Remastered.
Yes. So definitely check it out, Night Dive Studios, and it's on Steam and available. Actually, Night Dive Twitch was doing it last night.
My understanding is that if I do my job right tomorrow, it goes on to the Humble Store as well. So
yes.
Oh, fantastic!
Coming out on console by the end of the year. So again, thank you very much for this, and have a good night, guys.
You have a great night, Larry.
Next time I come on, Jewish comedy.
There we go.
Telling all my jokes.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Wow, that was awesome. It definitely went longer. And for all of you guys tuning in and listening to this, the VOD will be
Thank
up
you
on
for
Twitch. And I
yes.
will also I would probably split it up into two different podcasts just because it's a long one, but it's a
Yeah.
very needed one. And thank you to everybody that tuned in and everybody that
Absolutely.
commented. And actually, I did want to say this real quick.
Mhm.
SD Scott, I appreciate your comments a lot. And you have a lot of really good points.
Yes.
Should we tolerate the destroying of some lives because more lives aren't destroyed? And honestly, a lot of it comes to philosophical conversations, which actually
It
here
does.
pretty soon we will have a friend of mine, Corey, from Ireland on. And he was an archaeologist. He also does a lot with philosophy and everything. And that's one thing we talk about is how like we as human beings are ever evolving and we are ever learning, like being ing as in the verb, not in the noun, because that's the human condition. Like we never stop learning. And I was going to mention, he mentioned about Pol Pot in the 1970s in Cambodia and the Cambodian genocide. And one thing that I did want to mention, and this goes along with cancel culture real quick, is if we look at history and we try to take the things out of history that we don't like,
Mhm.
we try to cancel them, we will
Right.
be doomed to have the same mistakes
Repeat
over
it.
again.
It
Pol
is
Pot tried
absolutely
to take it back to zero and,
right.
start over. We are going to start over
We
from here. And
we
it
can't.
did not end well. No.
No, and unfortunately, if that is, it seems to me to be a trend that is going to continue, and it's a very dangerous and slippery slope that could potentially um, lead us down a path to events that we don't want to see in our lifetime. Okay.
Absolutely.
And for everybody that is tuned in, please understand these conversations that we have are not designed to offend or to oppress or
No.
any of that bullshit. We are here to simply educate and sometimes entertain.
Well,
Uh,
yes.
we are people who are able to have different point of views and come together in a civil fashion and have that respect and that common ground understanding and know that just because we don't agree doesn't make the other person horrible. And
And
that
it
is a
doesn't
lesson
make
that
them our
really,
enemy.
exactly, and that is a lesson that really needs to be retaught in our society. Respect is something that I feel has gone to the wayside, and it really needs to be reinstilled in all of our people on both sides.
Absolutely. And Scott, you are very, very right. When we
Spot
cancel
on.
the parts of the story that makes us uncomfortable, we also eliminate some of the context of the story. And Larry
Right.
actually hit the nail on the head with that one too. You have to look at the context. You can pick and choose what you want. You can, you know, uh, yeah, I mean that's exactly it. If we want to cancel one part of history, well,
Right.
then we got to cancel another. And before you know it, it's just like if we're
Well,
only
there's nothing left.
highlighting the things in life and in this world that are happy go lucky, that we agree with, that fit inside our own echo chamber,
Yes,
then we're doomed
we are.
because you're
Absolutely.
missing out on so much more
Yep.
because there's that age old saying that history repeats itself. Well, why does history repeat itself? Because we choose to keep only that which is good and that which makes us feel
Exactly.
happy, and we don't want to talk about the uncomfortable things. Believe me, the way I grew up was, if it wasn't great, if it was uncomfortable, I didn't want to talk about it. If it And I still
Excuse me.
struggle with that to this day,
Yeah.
that I make myself and I remind myself that we need, Red, you and I have mentioned this on hashtag the more you know, we need to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable sometimes.
You know what we do, and it is something that we can't get away from, folks. There are, for lack of better words, shitty things in our nation's history. There are dark times in our nation's history. Does that make us infallible? No. Does that make us perfect? Does that make us horrible people? It does not. To try to sit and blame people today for the actions of yesterday, it's kind of ludicrous. All right.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, people, is we do have a dark history in our country, but those of us who are alive today are not responsible for those past actions. We need to drop all the barriers and all the bullshit and come together as one people. All right, this is getting old. This animosity, this fighting, it's done. It's played out. Right? It's just, in the words of the late George Carlin, it's all bullshit and it's bad for you.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is too, is that we forget so many times that, I mean, and especially, and I'll use the US as an example. I mean, I talk to people in the UK, I talk to people all over the world, and I appreciate the experience to be able to do that because it helps me understand what's going on. Because a lot of times here in America, we get so caught up on only what's happening in America and forget that we are one small part of
Right.
an entirely big picture, which is the world, and that everything will affect it. But where I'm going with that is that here in America, at least politically, and it's spreading to even more than just politically, it's right versus left, Republican versus Democrat. And what we need to do is get back to the basics. Like, I would hear people say that when I was younger, and I'm like, "Oh, that sounds so dumb," but it's so true. What really matters? What, and because you have a differing opinion from me, whether it's political, social, economic, religious, whatever, if you have a differing opinion from me, that doesn't make you an enemy.
Right.
It's not the us versus them.
Correct.
And that's what we need to get back to. And that's why we have conversations like this. That's why we have discourse like this. Because that's the only way that real effective change is going to happen. Is if we can come together and have these hard conversations little by little. Do I think having an hour or 2 hour long podcast is going to change the entire world overnight? Absolutely not. But we change it one life at a time, one conversation at a time, one discussion at a time.
Exactly. And um, folks, as we come to wrapping this up, I want to throw a shout out to Beyond Barriers. Our website is www.beyondbarriersusa.org, and you can find links to these podcasts, all the ones we've done for Coffee and Conversation, hashtag the more you know, and the Beyond Barriers podcast. They are wonderful, wonderful tools to get into the minds of who we are at Beyond Barriers and what we try to do. The website
Absolutely.
is very easy to navigate. There's a contact tab. There's a media tab, articles. There's news stories. If you click on the team, you can read through who we are and a little bit of our stories. There's also a donate tab. Now, I get it, folks. Life is tough right now. The pandemic has made damn sure of that, right?
Right.
But any donation that you are able and willing to give, it is tax deductible under the 501c3 tax code. Now, what does that mean? A lot of the mumbo jumbo, yeah, I get it. But what that means for you is that you get to write off that donation on your taxes. So essentially, you're getting that money back. We would appreciate any likes, follows, shares, etc. on social media, because that just expands our audience. We want to continue to bring you this programming. We want to be able to expand this programming to do even more. We
Absolutely.
love being able to interact with all of you. It is such an amazing experience that I can't begin to fathom can't begin to even adequately express, right? You can also find us on Anchor FM, Anchor.fm rather. You can also subscribe there as well. I believe it starts as low as 99 cents a month and goes up to $5 a month. I mean, that's a pretty reasonable price.
It's much like a Patreon, but it's
Very much
strictly
so.
for all the podcasts, and with that you get all the Beyond Barriers podcasts. We try to do at least 2 episodes of that a month. It is run by myself and Jeff Scoop, another former extremist, and the founder of Beyond Barriers. And so you'll also have that. You'll have these. And if anybody is interested in more information or want to know, because we also understand that times are tough. Not everybody can financially give, but even giving of your time and stuff like that. So feel free. You can email us at info@beyondbarriersusa.org. I'll put it up in the chat. Also, Beyond Barriers, and I don't always touch on this, and I appreciate you putting the plug in there, Red, for it. Beyond Barriers, you have a lot of organizations out there that strictly are trying to get people to come away from extremism, no matter what type that is. But we at Beyond Barriers, yes, we want to bring people out of extremism, and having been there ourselves, but it's also educating the communities, not just on the threat of extremism, but having discussions like these so that, we can come together as
further extremism.
Exactly. Preventing. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining in. Thank you for Red for once again having another great coffee and convo. And thank you, Larry Kuperman, for joining us again. Next week, we will not have an episode, most likely. If something changes, I will put it in the schedule. But we should be back the following week with some more great conversation. And I appreciate every one of you. If you like the content on this channel, please feel free to subscribe to the Twitch.
Hit that button.
To the
Smash
Beyond Barriers YouTube. And we will see you all later. Any last words, Red?
Peace, love, and graham crackers, and just be good to one another.
Absolutely. Be good, everybody. Thank you so much. And